sure a lot of you guys are wondering, Rick, what are we building today? What the heck is that? Well, I'm gonna tell you. So what this is an electronic control system for a dual high output alternator system from Balmar. Now, you guys remember we installed this first alternator back about 3 months ago. That is a high output 48 volt 100 amp 5 kilowatt alternator. Now we have already got over 200 hours of testing on this thing and it is working perfectly. I mean, 2 thumbs up. It is amazing, seriously. It puts out so much power. Even when the engine is at about 1000 RPM, it puts out almost 3000 watts. It takes about, when I bring the engine up to about 1400 RPM, that's when we're getting about 4500 watts continuous, even at temperature. That's amazing. Our normal cruising RPM is about 2000 RPM, so of course then it would be putting out the full 5000, probably 5000 plus watts. But when we're just using it normally at anchor, okay, that is when we run it at about 1400 RPM and we're still getting over 4000, almost 4500 watts continuous. Amazing. Now we get to start the second part of this project, which I've been waiting for a long time, and that is this baby right here. Meet number 2. This is a second alternator, exactly the same as the first, so we're going to have both of these running 5000 watts each, and that's going to bring our new Beta Marine engine up to 10,000 watts 10,000 watts of pure DC power directly to the lithium power bank. That's amazing. So you can understand, I'm excited about this upgrade. I've been waiting for this from Balmar for a long time. So thank you very much, Balmar, for finally getting this one out to us, and I can't wait to test it. Okay, so you remember when we added this first alternator, we had to add special brackets that were made for us by Beta Marine. And these brackets are especially heavy duty because these alternators can draw 8 to 9 horsepower when they're at full load. Now, for the second alternator, we had to do the same thing. Beta Marine built us custom brackets and we just finished mounting those, which you can see right here. Now again, they have done a beautiful job and it is totally factory. It looks like an original part of the engine. This is a very heavy base that's bolted right in, and the load is all taken from the alternator straight into compression into the side of the engine, so there's literally no stress on the 3 bolts that hold it there whatsoever. And then this arm here, this control arm here, is what we use for adjusting the tension on our pulleys. So we've just finished assembling all of that. Now we just need to put the alternator in place and then we can start messing around. Now I have to admit, this is where I created my first issue because I made one mistake with all the belts that I bought for both alternators. I bought all the belts under the assumption that the spacing from the crank pulley to the alternator pulley was going to remain the same. Of course, failing to realize that the new brackets were going to move the second alternator pulley about 2 inches further from the crank pulley, rendering all my extra belts completely useless. So now the issue I created is I can't run the engine unless I put the old alternator back on, because this alternator is also the one that carries the belt for the water pump for the engine. So just as an experiment, I tried something I used before in an emergency, which was a bungee cord, because there's not a lot of tension put on the belt from the water pump. The water pump doesn't use a lot of horsepower, it just needs to turn to circulate water to keep the engine cool. So by stretching a high tension bungee cord, tying a knot in it, and wrapping it around the pulley, it will actually run the engine. Not at full RPM. If you try and rev it too hard, it'll just blow off. But if you need your engine in an emergency and you have no backup belt, look for a bungee cord. Next, I had to try and find a replacement alternator belt in the correct size, and of course the 6PK flat belt styling. That turned out to be quite an adventure and impossible on this island. So what I decided to do in the meantime was find a standard V belt that was the right length and just put it on top of the 6PK pulleys, tension it, and it's not going to run the alternator by any stretch, but it will allow the engine to keep running, effectively turning the water pump without any difficulty whatsoever. It did take a few days before I finally found a proper size belt and had it shipped in. So with this belt in hand, it's time for first test. Stage 2 of the wiring is complete. Might look a little crazy, but I can assure you it all makes perfect sense. But this is our new control panel. 2 regulators for 2 alternators. So I've labeled them starboard alternator and port alternator. They're also monitored electronically with a battery monitor system that we can look up on an app. So each alternator is registered as alternator A or B. And with the SG2000, it also has a Bluetooth monitor, so when we log in with the app, we can actually track how each alternator is doing individually and see what its settings are, adjust the settings, monitor its output, and so forth. So that's very cool. But of course, because we have 2 alternators, we have to make sure that they stay in sync. Just like 2 engines, they have to be doing the same thing at the same time. So basically, they have to know what the other one is doing. That's what this device is for, and this is called a center fielder. So this is another product made by Balmar, and it's meant for balancing dual alternator outputs. So whether you have dual engines or just 2 alternators on 1 engine, you use one of these devices to balance the outputs of both alternators, so each alternator knows what the other is doing and they don't start fighting each other for the high voltage. Now again, it looks like a lot of wiring, but it's very simple basically, because every device just has its own power and its own ground. And the big one, we've changed the cable to a heavier gauge. This is the power wire, and it runs at 12 volts because the field that the alternators use is 12 volts, not 48 volts. So we have to run 2 different banks of power. So that's why we have 48 volts here. This is the output for the alternators, and that's why I've labeled them 48 volts DC right there. But for the field regulation, they require 12 volts, and that's these wires. Then we have ignition feeds for each one. We have a field output for each one. And we have a voltage sense wire for the 48 volt bank system, and that's where you see these 3 fuses right here that just come straight to the 48 volt DC block. So when we open up these blocks, this is where the heavy duty power cables are going to feed. So each one is going to have a direct cable from the battery at one of the terminals, and then the other 2 terminals will be one for each alternator, so positive and negative. Now from the negative, for the SG2000 to work properly, it needs to have a shunt or something that tells it how much power is going in or out of the batteries at any given time. So that's what this device is for, and this is the shunt for the SG2000. So there's 2 outputs or 2 terminals on this. One goes directly to the battery bank, and the other goes directly to the outputs from any loads or charging devices. In this case, our alternators. So there's only going to be the 2 terminals hooked up there, but then this, the data link cable here, runs straight into the SG2000, and it uses all the information through the shunt, through different resistances, to calculate exactly how much power is being used or charged. So that's very nice to know. Of course, it's a very important feature of any electrical system, especially on a boat. You need to know how much power you're using at any given time. As far as the devices, I've got everything categorized into 3 different harnesses. So we have one. This is the power cable. So this is the one that's going to go down to the 12 volt system. And you see I've got it labeled 12 volt power. So we have a 12 volt start battery for the engine. That's where this goes, and it provides power for the field of the regulators. Okay, the other 2, of course, are the ones that go to the back of each alternator. And again, I've got them labeled port alternator. And this just has 2 wire hookups, one for the field and one for the stator, which is the tachometer sense. So each alternator, this is the starboard alternator, same thing, has the field wire and the stator. And the stator just tells the regulator how fast the alternator is spinning, and of course if the alternator is spinning, so it always knows exactly what the alternator is doing at any given time. Now the starboard alternator is also the one where the wire harness for the new engine is, so that's why we got these extra cables that I put in this harness, and this one is for the tachometer to go up to the display at the helm, so that when I start the engine I know what RPM it's running at. That's what this lead is for. And the other 2 are just for the ignition. Because the ignition, when the engine is on or off, we feed that into here, and that's what turns on all of the circuitry here and makes all the regulators work. So with that, we're ready for stage 3, which is basically install this, put it into position, and then just start hooking up all the wires. We have to disconnect the power wires that are on the alternator, the first alternator now, and then we'll have 2 cables that will run from here to each alternator. So each alternator will be wired separately with power and ground directly to the terminals here, and then to the shunt, and then to the batteries. And that's it. So let's get to work. So here, all I'm doing is locating a proper place to put the shunt where it will be accessible and easy to hook up the wires. And then of course the data cables, which are going to carry all the information about the alternators to the SG2000. Well, I think we are ready. Everything is hooked up. But to start, as you can see, I've got both the regulators are wired up with the center fielder. So each one of these has its own feed for ignition and ground, and a 12-volt supply wire for the field, and the stator wire from each alternator. So each one of these knows exactly what each alternator is doing or not doing. Now, the power cable section, you see I've got that all hooked up now as well. The 48-volt DC bus, so the direct charging cable from each alternator is hooked up directly to this bus, and then there's one cable that goes from this bus directly to the battery bank for charging. And then exactly the same for the ground bus down here. One cable from each alternator, one cable to the batteries. Now, with the new alternator, you can see I've got it hooked up here, and we actually discovered that we had another adjustable mount for it that was in the box, but I didn't know what it was. It wasn't explained, and I wasn't sure, but then I figured out that is the pulley adjustment for this mount. So once we got that figured out and installed, it works beautifully, and I must say it's so easy to adjust the pulley tension or the belt tension on these alternators now. It's incredible. So that's this device here. At the back of the alternator, you can see we've got the power wire and the ground, and of course just the other harness, which is the field wire input to the alternator and the stator output to the tachometer. The port alternator, exactly the same thing. So both of these alternators now have brand new cables, and they're very heavy duty high grade marine cables, which should last a good 10 years, because basically I want to do this once and not have to worry about it again. And you'll also notice back here we've got the blowers, because I've got blowers hooked up for each one of the alternators, and this blower is just hooked up. It's a 4-inch blower, and it has one of these flexible tubes that goes down into the bilge so that it draws cool air from the bilge. And then it takes that cool air and blasts it right at the back of the alternator where the air intake is for the cooling vent. So that's what's going to help keep these alternators cool, because of course when they're running at full output, they're going to generate a lot of heat. So to get rid of that heat, we got to blast cool air on the alternators and then suck the hot air out of the engine compartment with another 4-inch blower that goes straight out the back of the boat. So both alternators have their own cooling jets, which is going to help keep them cool when we are running at full steam. Now you'll see the two data cables here, that's the gray wires, and they come down and go directly to the shunt. Okay, and that's the shunt for this device right here. So we have one wire that's hooked up directly to the shunt that comes to the SG2000. Now everything is hooked up and running. It has its Bluetooth device right here, and you might be able to see, let's see. Yeah, it's at 0.0 amps because of course nothing is running right now. So really the only thing left is to turn it on and see what happens. So for now, I have a switch here that is controlling both of the blowers independently from the engine switch, so that I can switch them on and off as I want to instead of when the engine's running. That way I know for sure that they're running. So, and you can immediately feel a lot of wind. There's a very good breeze coming out the back of the alternators. Alright, well, all that's left now is just to start the engine and see what happens, and cross our fingers, hopefully everything does exactly what it's supposed to do. So I'm going to turn on the blowers now, and we'll go up in the cockpit and start the engine, and then we'll look at our device and see how much power it's putting out. Okay, so I haven't finished setting up the SG2000, the Balmar controller yet. That's got a little bit more work to set up in the app, but I want to get this tested now just to see what the alternators are doing. So I booted up my Victron monitor, which is real time, and will show us a summary of everything going on in the boat. So as you can see here, it's showing me AC loads, photovoltaic charger, that's the solar power, how much is charging or discharging, and whether there's any AC or generator input, which of course there's not. So right now, we have 500 watts of AC, and that of course is because we're using AC downstairs, the air conditioning. We're getting 1600 watts of solar, and as you can see, we're getting about 400 to 500 watts of charging overall with everything running. So now we're going to start up the engine, like so, and give it a few seconds because the Balmars have a soft start, so it won't just fire up the alternators instantly. It'll allows them to come up to speed gradually, increasing the field over time so that we don't overload the belts. It gives the pulleys and the belts time to warm up before it actually hits them with full load. That's 1100 RPM. So at 1100 RPM, I'm getting 5800 watts. If you deduct some of the solar, we're getting about 600 of solar, so that's making still 5000 watts at 1100 RPM. Let's bring it up to 1200, 8200 watts. 8000 watts, 7800, and of course it's going to fluctuate a little bit as the belts come up to temperature and the photovoltaics, the solar changes on the panels. But look, still over 7500 watts. And that's only at 1200 RPM. That's a lot. All right, 1300, 9148 watts. And the solar is down a bit, so of course we're getting over 8000 watts from the engine right now. 9700 watts, including the solar. So 9000 of that is the alternators alone at 1300 RPM. Now I'm going to give it a second there just to warm up the belts a little bit before I put too much load, and then we'll bring it up to 14 and 1500 and do another measurement. Okay, there is 1500 RPM, and we are getting 11,000 watts. 10,600, 10,500, and again about 600 or 700 of that is overage from the sun. It's still over 10,000 watts. And this is the RPM that we usually charge at when we're just sitting at anchor, 1500 RPM. Okay, so I'm going to bring it up a little bit higher and see what we're getting for full power. That's 1800 RPM. And yeah, you can see we're at 12,500 watts, 12,300. So some of that is solar, but only about 600 watts. So we're still getting over 11,000 watts of power at 1800 RPM. Normally when we're cruising, we'll be doing about 2000 RPM, so there's still a bit of reserve there left as well. Two thumbs up, man. Everything is working perfectly. You can't ask for much better than that. Yeah, that's amazing. So thanks again to Balmar for helping out with this project. I can't wait to test all these devices over the next few months in our real world environment. Now, for those of you that are interested in this kind of product, I can't really tell you what the prices are because they're changing. They're at that point where it's up and down, and of course it's a custom application, so it depends on your application, your boat, the size of alternator you want, the size of mount you need, all of that stuff. So I'll post some links to the Balmar website, but ultimately you'll have to get in touch with them to get a quote for your individual application. So I'll leave that in the description below for you. So thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you learned something. I did. It was a good day. Everything good. So thumbs up to you guys. Salute. Have a great day, and we'll see you next episode. Ciao for now.